is a very stormy, very rainy afternoon here in central Ohio. I'd say that's a perfect opportunity for an episode of Tornado Tales. What do you say? For today's episode, we're actually going to be talking about what is to this point the most recent EF5 tornado to hit the United States. The one that hit Moore, Oklahoma back in 2013. Let's do it.
Oh, that is scary. The truck is, oh my gosh. Holy smokes.
What's happening, ladies and germs? This is the PackerMan, and welcome to today's edition of Tornado Tales. If you recall from the previous episode, I talked about the first ever tornado that was rated F5 using the new at the time Fujita scale in Waco, Texas, which was the first one to be officially rated an F5 since record keeping was first kept in 1950. Well, now we're going to be talking about the most recent Force 5 rated tornado, and it happened all the way back in 2013. So we're currently in the longest stretch without an F5 or EF5 rated tornado. In fact, this was the same city that had an F5 tornado blow through, and we had a long drought after that as well. Kind of funny how that all works. Of course, I'm talking about the EF5 tornado that blew through Moore, Oklahoma back on May the 20th, 2013. And it followed a track that was very similar to the one that struck in 1999, which is another tornado we will be talking about on the show sooner rather than later, because that, as mentioned in the first episode, is the Supertwister, as I call it, because it was just so incredibly powerful. It had wind speeds over 300 miles an hour, and that was done with a mobile Doppler radar. So that goes to show you how strong that freaking storm was. However, this particular EF5 that went through Moore had estimated wind speeds at 210 miles an hour, which would place it at EF5 status. It was actually on the ground for about 39 minutes, which for a tornado of that strength is a long freaking time. And there was actually a point in Moore where the Supertwister, the last tornado to be rated an F5 before the enhanced Fujita scale came out, and the most recent EF5, which is the one that struck on May the 20th, 2013, there's actually a point where they actually crossed paths. It is the only spot in the entire world where an F5 and an EF5 have crossed paths. Wrap your head around that shit. But this tornado was actually part of a larger tornado outbreak that occurred between the days of May the 18th and May the 21st in 2013. It's just obviously this is the one that gets talked about the most because it was the one that caused the most amount of damage and obviously the most amount of lost life. There were actually 67 confirmed tornadoes during this particular outbreak, including the Moore EF5. And the largest hail was actually 4.25 inches in diameter, which is quite large. That occurred in Oklahoma on May the 20th. And this particular tornado outbreak caused between $2 and $5 billion in damage. And don't forget, this is 2013 standards, so even by 2013, that's a hell of a lot of money. There was a tornado watch that was issued for the area around Moore at around 1 p.m. Central Time on May the 20th, and the thunderstorm that would eventually produce said tornado would actually form at around 2 o'clock and would rapidly strengthen. And the National Weather Service would eventually issue severe thunderstorm warnings for the area, and then eventually it would drop what would eventually become the last EF5 tornado to hit the United States. As the rotation in the cloud base was starting to get stronger and stronger, tornado warnings would eventually be issued for western Cleveland, northern McLean, and southern Oklahoma counties as the storm approached the Oklahoma City metropolitan area. And then the tornado itself finally touched down at 2:56 p.m. in McLean County. Where it touched down was roughly about 4.5 miles northwest of the city of Newcastle. And it was initially just, a narrow cone-shaped tornado with EF1 strength, but it would eventually strengthen and strengthen and strengthen as it headed towards more, and eventually it was putting out EF4 level damage. The tornado had also grown in size by this point, transforming from a narrow cone-shaped tornado into a large wedge that we normally associate with massive long-track tornadoes like this. And eventually at 3:01 p.m. Central Time, the National Weather Service would issue a tornado emergency for the city of Moore. Now, a tornado emergency is a step beyond the tornado warning. A tornado emergency usually means that a tornado has been spotted in the area and will probably cause considerable to catastrophic damage, which is usually what the tornado emergency is for. And it's to let people know, hey, there's a damaging tornado in the area. You need to take shelter immediately. Get out of cars, mobile homes, anything that's not strapped down, get underground immediately. And that was definitely the case for the city of Moore here on this day. Big this tornado eventually got, well, radar indicated that there was a debris ball at least 1 mile in diameter around the hook echo. In addition, it was also producing straight line winds of around 80 miles per hour about 1 mile around the tornado. So this sucker was incredibly powerful, even if you weren't near the main circulation. And it was also a multiple vortex tornado, which is where you have multiple vortices circulating around a common axis. And that's what makes it so dangerous, is because when you have these multiple vortices going around, it makes the tornado appear bigger, and it also, and let's be honest here, if a tornado is going to be able to produce multiple vortices like this, it's got to be producing a lot of power. And wind speeds are generally going to be over 200 miles an hour in that case. And if you're above ground when you get sucked up into one of these things, you're probably not surviving. The tornado eventually crossed the Canadian River into Cleveland County and severely damaged a decommissioned bridge on US 62 and US 277. And because it was so severely damaged, the tornado ripped part of its mount and tossed it across Interstate 44. So it was so severely damaged that it had to be demolished after the tornado. It then continued directly towards southern Oklahoma and more, following along Southwest 149th Street. At that point, it began to grow rapidly up to its 1 mile in width. And there was some more EF4 damage noted near South May Avenue, where several homes were leveled, including several homes that were swept clean from their foundation. And the reason why it was determined to be EF4 damage is because of the new way that they determine damage in the enhanced Fujita scale. Several of these homes were determined to be nailed down instead of bolted down, which is the difference between determining if it's EF4 level damage or EF5 level damage. Trees were completely debarked in this area. There were vehicles, parts of vehicles wrapped around trees. Like, the damage was incredible in this part of the area. And as it turned out, while this tornado was beginning to cross into southern Oklahoma City, there was actually a traffic jam that had occurred for a stretch of several miles along Santa Fe Avenue, as people were attempting to either escape from or trying to pick up their children from school that were in schools that were located near the tornado's damage path, which obviously, if you're a parent, the last thing you want is for your kids to be in the path of this thing, considering how powerful it was. And the National Weather Service was urging people, to try to get out of the area, get out of the tornado's path, because this sucker was huge and it was tearing everything up that was in its path. The tornado also struck an oil production site, and 4 oil tanks were completely blown away, one of which was never found. Those things are pretty freaking heavy, so that in itself also shows how powerful this tornado was. The tornado struck the Orr family farm and Celestial Acres horse training area, and this is when it really started to do some damage. Up to 100 horses were reportedly killed in this area, some of them being tossed into, entangled in down power lines, or thrown on top of nearby buildings. There were several horses that survived the tornado but suffered severe injuries, such as being impaled by tree limbs or boards. Ow. Every building at the Celestial Acres was either leveled or swept away at EF4 intensity. The ground on the property was scoured to bare soil, because that's another thing that these tornadoes can do. They can do deep ground scouring. Like the Dead Man's Walking tornado from Gerald, Texas. Ground scouring was reportedly up to 18 inches deep, which is about 1.5 feet. Like, that is insanity. Damage surveyors noted that the tornado was likely at EF5 intensity at this point, but because of the structural integrity of the buildings that it struck, it was only allowed to be given an EF4 rating. Which, I mean, there are some flaws with that in my opinion, but you know, it is what it is. There was actually a 10-ton propane tank that was on the property as well, and was thrown for more than half a mile by the tornado. And a strip mall near the farm was also completely leveled. Then the tornado struck the Briarwood Elementary School. The damage was originally rated EF5 intensity, but further studies indicated that it was of poor construction and was only given an EF4 rating. But thankfully, there were no fatalities at the school. There were, however, two 12,000-gallon water tanks that were also swept off of the Orr family farm grounds and were thrown into this particular area. And the roof of the Briarwood Elementary was struck by one of them, which potentially aided in compromising the building's structural integrity, as it bent the steel girders that held up the roof. And then the tornado struck the building right afterwards. So, yeah. This is why you don't want to be outside during a tornado either, especially if you're in its path, because anything that it picks up is potentially debris that you're going to have to dodge or watch out for or get struck by. And the last thing you want is get struck by a 12,000-gallon water tank. And then the tornado intensified even further, as if... Man, that's a scary thought. And hit the densely populated areas around Western Moore, including the Westmore subdivision, where there were many well-built, anchor-bolted brick homes. And they were flattened at EF4 intensity, and there were two that were completely swept from their foundation, which is where this tornado got its EF5 rating. Took it long enough, huh? The Twister continued its northeasterly trek and was starting to hit very populated areas and neighborhoods, debarking trees, leveling homes, and then eventually it struck the Plaza Towers Elementary School, where unfortunately 7 children were killed at the school by this tornado. The Moore Medical Center also received some significant damage from this tornado, and there were actually several cars that were thrown against the entrance of the medical center, which also sustained EF4 level damage. In neighborhoods surrounding the medical center, there was actually a row of 4 well-constructed brick homes that were secured with anchor bolts that were completely swept away by the tornado, and these were rated EF5 in damage as well. And what was also crazy about this particular tornado was the fact that it would weaken in intensity, and then all of a sudden it would just regain its strength. And it happened several times during this point, because afterwards, after it flattened the brick homes, it actually weakened to about an EF3 level tornado, and then all of a sudden it just completely just re-intensified back up to EF5 level intensity. It's just absolutely insane. The Warren Theater was spared a direct hit, although it did sustain some considerable damage to its exterior. But there was a bowling alley in the area that was leveled, and a 7-Eleven, which was completely flattened, and 4 people were killed inside, which unfortunately included a 3-month-old infant. So if you're counting at home, that's 8 children so far that have been killed by this tornado. At the Hunter's Glen Court, there was 1 brick home that was completely wiped off its foundation with pretty much nothing left. And it was rated EF5 because it was an anchor bolted home as well. The tornado would continue to track through Moore's easterly neighborhoods and nearly struck the Highland East Junior High's main building, but it was spared. But the gymnasium building was completely destroyed. The Moore Public Schools Administration building, which was a converted former hospital located a few blocks to the east, was also struck and completely leveled by the tornado. It was noticeably narrower at this point. It wasn't as wide as it was once before, but it was still putting out EF4 level damage. And there were some cases where it was still causing EF5 level damage as well. There were a couple of well-built anchor-bolted homes at the corner of Heatherwood Drive and Southeast 5th Street, and it was reduced to nothing but a bare slab, sustaining EF5 damage. And there was another large, well-bolted down home at the end of a private drive near South Old Bridge Road, and it was also completely swept clean. Like, if a tornado is capable of doing this to well-built anchor-bolted homes, I mean, good Lord. That's easily, EF5 level strength. I mean, that just shows you the raw power that a tornado can produce. It's just, I watch videos of this stuff all the time on YouTube and all that other stuff. I used to watch shows of this stuff on TV as a kid as well. And it's still absolutely crazy, the power that these things can produce. The tornado finally dissipated at 3:35 p.m. Central Time. And by the time it was all said and done, 24 people had died in this tornado, and over 200 were left injured. And the tornado had caused almost $2 billion in damage. So the final numbers from the Oklahoma Department of Emergency Management reported that 25 people were killed. There was another death indirectly attributed to the tornado. There were an estimated 1,150 homes that were destroyed, which resulted in the estimated $2 billion in damages, and there were 377 people injured. Entire subdivisions were completely obliterated, and houses were flattened in a large swath of the city. Some meteorologists even estimated that the energy that was released by the tornado and the storm itself likely was up to 600 times greater than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. And thus ends the story of the EF5 Moore tornado from 2013, which is currently the last tornado in the United States to be rated in EF5. In fact, it's the last one in the entire world that's been rated in EF5. It's the longest drought that we've had between EF5 tornadoes. Almost going on a decade now since our last EF5 tornado, and hopefully it stays that way. But something tells me that the next big EF5 is right around the corner, because, can't go this long without one, without one striking. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but we've seen what happened when, we go through long droughts like this and shit, so. Well, that'll do it for this edition of Tornado Tales. If you enjoyed listening to me talk about various tornado stories, be sure to hit like on this video, because, the algorithm likes that. And also subscribe for more stories on various tornadic events. It won't always be EF5 tornadoes. It could sometimes be lesser known tornadoes or less powerful tornadoes that have an infamousy, like, say, the Andover tornado from 1991. I don't know, we might talk about that next time. So, but we'll see. But thank you very much for watching today's edition of Tornado Tales. And until next time, this is the PackerMan signing out. See you later. This video is sponsored by Dubby Jitterless Energy Blend. Click on the link in the description and use the code PackerMan to save 10% on any order. Hey ladies and germs, thank you for watching tonight's video. If you would like to sponsor the channel, be sure to click on the link to my Patreon down in the description below. Otherwise, hit like and subscribe to be able to tune in for more great content like you just saw today. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, this is the PackerMan signing out.